Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the webinar this evening with David Orban and Justin Clark about comparing the blockchain revolution with the internet revolution. It's great to see so many people online. And before I introduce the panelists tonight, I wanted to just give everyone a little bit of a view of who's on the webinar tonight, who's here, who's listening in. Are you similar to them or are you different? So when we sign people up on the webinar, we ask a few questions. And so I decided tonight just to put up this information. So as we can see tonight, most people are calling themselves novices or having a basic understanding of blockchain. And most people, 48% of people, in fact, don't even own Bitcoin. And 33% have some altcoins, with only 19% of people having ever participated in a token sale. And tonight you can see from the map there where our participants are from in the world. So we're gonna start this evening just with introduction of both David and Justin. Of course, David is doing a webinar series this month, and joining him this week is Justin, who is a board member at Migrate and has run internet companies since the late 90s. But I'll let them introduce themselves. Just before I do that, I just want to make double sure that everybody is seeing my screen. Justin and David, can you see the screen?
That's correct. We can see your shared screen with the image that is now not covering the rest of your screen, whatever it is there.
Got you loud and clear.
Okay, great. So yeah, if we just start with an introduction. David, perhaps if you can just start giving a background, especially with regards to the fact that you've gone through sort of the internet revolution and moving forward. If you can give us a background of yourself, and then we'll move over to Justin.
My name is David Orban. I'm an investor in Wealth Migrate, and I'm very much looking forward to its next phase of growth. Before becoming a venture capital investor, I was a high technology entrepreneur. I've started in artificial intelligence 33, 34 years ago, and has created, built, and grown and failed and closed companies both in Europe and in the US. And yes, as you mentioned, I was around when the commercial internet started at the beginning of the 90s, as well as I was around when Bitcoin started in 2010 and onwards. So that is why we thought we could draw the analogies and try to dissect what the similarities and the differences are between the two periods of time.
Great, thanks so much, David. And Justin, yourself?
Kevin, yes, guys, hi there, Justin Clark. Many of you that are from South Africa would probably know of the website that we started in the 90s, private property, online property portal that effectively dislodged the newspaper classifieds advertising. So yeah, I think what is super interesting is I'm talking about the 90s here, and both David and myself lived through that period, and the whole crypto experience is very much the same, and I think that's what we're going to investigate later on tonight. Just back onto my history, and I think what is quite relevant to Wealth Migrate is that we started classifieds businesses and invested in classifieds businesses across Africa. a really tough space to play in the technology game. And I've recently exited there, but we built in 10 odd countries significantly the biggest classifieds operation in Africa. And so I think we've learned a lot about launching new businesses in areas that the internet didn't really have traction, and the effect that the similarity that that'll have with what's going to happen with the blockchain.
Great, thanks so much, Justin. So the way we're going to run tonight is tonight's going to be a Q&A session with Justin and David, and I'm going to be asking the questions, and I'll then hand it over to the two of you to give your views and give a better understanding around the similarities and the differences between what we've seen in the past and what we're seeing now, because as we all know, you definitely can learn from what's happened in the past, and often things do repeat themselves. And so so we'll go into the first question. As we usually do with all of our webinars, we really like to be interactive, and so there is the questions box. I see we do have people already who are posting some questions, so please do post questions, and so that we can keep this interactive. And if there are any issues, please also make those known. I know there's Vanessa who said, unfortunately, there's a huge electrical storm and she's going to have to disappear now. So sorry to hear that, Vanessa. But yeah, let's get going. Our first question for tonight is: the internet required the World Wide Web to become accessible, and it really only started taking off with the introduction of Mosaic and Netscape as graphical browsers. Where do you feel we are in terms of blockchain at this present moment, using that as an analogy?
So the internet was born in the 70s, actually, from the progressive aggregation of networks. That is why it's a network of networks, and the various protocols that were built were developed in academia. There is a kind of a joke that Al Gore invented the internet, and it is half true, because it was under his guidance that the federally funded infrastructure that was used for research and academia and by the military was made available for commercial uses as well. And it is at that point that the possibility of commercial applications and the profit that came with them brought the internet to a wider group of users. Now, we remember that, or some of us remember that before the browser, the internet was very complicated and it wasn't convenient to find information. But even when the browser became available, actually getting on the internet was pretty complicated by itself. You had to go to a store, buy a modem, buy the browser on a CD-ROM or maybe even on floppy disks, and then go home, disconnect your phone, connect the modem, reconnect the phone, find the dial-up number, all the little codes that you needed to put in for the modem to work. It was a really, really long process. It is not something that your uncle or aunt or grandmother would do. In some ways, getting into Bitcoin and blockchain is not hard. The first steps are not hard at all. There are exchanges. One of the most popular is Coinbase, for example, or rather, Coinbase is an online wallet, and that's easy. But in many other ways, we are still absolutely in the complicated pre-browser phase in terms of what people who are not very geeky can do with blockchain.
Yeah, I can't add much to that, but to say in 2 words, bulletin boards. We're around about where bulletin boards, the accessibility of bulletin boards in the mid-90s. So yeah, I think that's all.
Okay, yeah. So you know, many people are currently seeing blockchain sort of as a place for geeks, which is sort of the same as the early internet. You know, it's again, like you say, bulletin boards, forums. You know, that's essentially where blockchain is sitting. So what does this mean going forward? Where do we move from here? How does it look? What do you think?
There is an important difference. With bulletin boards and all the functionalities that the internet gave to geeks, it was the geeks that found out how incredibly rich that ecosystem could become in terms of social interactions, the depth of understanding, the sharing of knowledge, the accelerating freedom that it gave, the learning about other cultures, etc. Today, with blockchain, there are at least 2-3 different subcultures that are intersecting and that are reverberating. One of them is the geeky developers, the people who love coding and computers and such. But the other is the financial types who have started savoring the freedom and the creativity that a very versatile tool gives them. And they seldom had that, because even though they may have felt this creative urge, they always operated under extremely strict boxes of products and services. And creating a new financial product was, you know, once in a lifetime thing for a few of them. And now it is available to anybody. So that is a big difference, because it enlarges enormously the attractivity, even at this point of the blockchain.
Okay. Anything to add there, Justin?
Yeah, I think you know, we talk about this this amazing convergence that's happening with all these different technologies, and I think the scale of software that's being written on the blockchain at the moment is enormous, David. If I'm you can correct me if I'm wrong. Remember, I'm not the crypto king here, but there is an enormous amount being built and an enormous amount of momentum. So although you know, there is still, we're still very early on the bell curve, and it's controlled a lot by the geeks at the moment. I think there's a much bigger momentum because it's distributed, and there's a lot more momentum as a result of this amount of work that's being already done on the blockchain.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So with that momentum, how do you think we could compare how the internet's mainstream adoption happened with what potentially could happen with blockchain? Are they going to follow the same sort of adoption type curve, or could it be different because we now have the internet to actually perpetuate the adoption of blockchain?
The differences are here very important, I believe. When the internet needed to be adopted and laid down in terms of dial-up access or later on broadband access, which is still an ongoing process, by the way, it could not travel but progressively spreading geographically. And there were very constant comparisons. Oh my God, Europe is ahead in the mobile. Oh my God, the US is ahead in broadband. Korea is beating everybody with the fastest speeds, with Sweden, etc., etc. And the investments that were needed in order to catch up were also local. Today with blockchain, we have a global communications infrastructure that enables anybody with a mobile phone to immediately start reaping the benefits. And the applications that are being developed are delivering these benefits to more and more people. So if it took 20 years to get where we are with the internet, maybe a bit more, almost 25, let's say, with blockchain, I believe is going to be much, much faster.
So Kevin, yeah, I've been on record as being quite conservative, and I'll tell you why. And I'm going to just have a look behind David in his cabinet there. You'll notice that he has a rack of CDs and a rack of DVDs, if I'm correct, and then a rack of books, a good old analog books. So, in my experience, when we were involved in the early internet, we thought that it would change the world immediately. And guys, a lot of you watching at the moment, I'm pretty certain that it's not going to happen at the pace that we think it's going to happen. I remember very clearly Bill Gates saying that if you're not online by the year 2000, guys, this is 2000, not 2020, then you are out of business. And 2000 came and went, and we're now in 2018. So, I think that people do change slowly, and there is going to be this amazing amount of innovation that happens as a result of the blockchain. There's absolutely no doubt about it. It is going to be a completely disruptive technology, but I think it's going to take a little longer. So I take a slightly more conservative view, David.
So David, you were mentioning mobile technology and the fact that many people are accessing the internet via their mobiles, especially in emerging economies. We see this to be the case. And and Justin, you were sort of mentioning convergence of many technologies. So, in emerging economies, is there the possibility that blockchain technology and blockchain-based dApps and DAOs actually come into place before people get massive penetration of the internet? Just like we have seen in many African countries, mobile phones coming into play before any landlines, so sort of having a leapfrog effect. Is that possible to happen in emerging economies, that we actually will have blockchain-based dApps as opposed to the internet as we all know it?
So what you are referring to is the application layer, where Google, Facebook, Twitter, and many others play on top of the internet infrastructure. Infrastructure is still going to be necessary in the blockchain world as well, but the application layer may not be adopted in the low and middle income countries before being replaced by the new wave of decentralized applications. A good example of this is India, where Facebook made an offer that they believed India couldn't refuse. And they were very surprised when India refused the offer. The offer consisted in what is called zero rating. So in exchange for Facebook gaining kind of a favorite status and being on the home screen of phones and being the default place where a browser would be opened, Facebook paid the data that people otherwise would need to pay to go on Facebook. And in Northern Africa, actually, if you ask people what is the internet, they will tell you it's Facebook as a consequence of this kind of policy. So India, being strong enough to refuse that, made actually sure that their country would be exposed to a wider variety of uses and applications rather than being restricted to this extremely tempting but slightly poisonous offer. So we are going to see, hopefully, enlightened approaches where the opportunities provided by a new generation of decentralized applications will be enabled to be rapidly taken on. And then hopefully this will also create a much more diverse and more robust and resilient approach to how people gather information, make judgments on what is appropriate or inappropriate, vote even for their various local or central elections, and then transact economically. So this is, for me, extremely promising.
Yeah, I would add to that, Kev. I think that in the emerging market, there's much more trust of technology. You know, there are still people that you and I both know that are concerned about internet banking and e-commerce transactions going haywire, or their wallet being hacked, which is a very real problem at the moment for cryptos. But in the emerging markets, there is a lot more trust of technology. And if you consider that the majority of Kenyans' GDP goes through M-Pesa, which is a mobile payment methodology. So very interesting to see what happens in the new world with regard to adoption of the applications that are going to be built on the blockchain.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it is really interesting having spent some time at different conferences, decentralization conferences like D10E. I've been able to meet people, for example, that are looking at creating mesh networks in emerging economies, all based off blockchain in order to have payments, etc., etc. So I think those sort of things will potentially spur that even further, especially if it broadens internet adoption. I mean, access to the web, because there just are so many places that just don't have access. I mean, I was looking up. There's still some countries where it's below 10% of people that have access. So the next question I wanted to ask is just, is the hype around cryptocurrency the same as it was during the internet boom? Is the feeling the same as the 90s? So, I mean, David, from your point of view, potentially from, this America and Europe, I mean, and yourself as well, Justin, so that, emerging economies, how does it feel? Is it the same? Is it different?
So there are places that are characterized by a very specific zeitgeist, by a spirit of the place. Every waiter in New York is an actor. Every limo driver in LA has a script of a blockbuster movie in his back pocket. And everybody, regardless of their real occupation in Silicon Valley, has a startup, or at least a startup idea, right? And this actually started in the 50s. The whole venture capital model of risk capital going in relatively crazy ideas very early, to reap benefits later on, a few years later, with a very large multiplier, was born and then developed through decades. And yes, I had my startup at the height of the internet boom in 98, 99, and early 2000. Then the bubble burst in March 2000, and we were actually applying what we thought was a good solution to a problem that is still open. At the time, I predicted that USB ports would be universal, that rather than being in the backs of tower computers, personal computers you put on the floor, where you have to lean down on the floor to stick in a USB something in a computer, they would migrate to the front of the computers or the sides of the computers. And I created what at the time I called web identity, a key, a physical key that would enable to prove who you are, transact, in commercial transactions, protect you from malware, etc., etc. So it was a smart company, and it is a still open question. But then when the bubble burst, it killed a lot of the initiatives. The very smart and the very lucky and the very viable businesses, of course, survived, or even, important businesses were created in the midst of the destruction. The hype today is potentially even larger. We are not at the peak of the hype yet. And we can measure very rapidly the hype cycles, Bitcoin growing, Bitcoin crashing. It lost 50% of its value in the last month. We can measure that immediately. But the fact that all over the world, from Korea to Japan to Australia to Africa to Europe to North America to South America, everybody is getting more and more interested, is going to generate a larger hype than with the first internet boom. At the peak, the total capitalization of the dot-com companies was $3 trillion. Okay, and so when I'm saying that it will go higher, that is what I'm referring to. The network value, if you go to CoinMarketCap, I didn't check it for the past few days, so maybe it is lower, but yeah, around $300 billion of network value, right? So what I'm predicting is that the hype is going to continue. The network value of all the coins and tokens to be more than $3 trillion.
Okay, Justin, from your side, what do you experience?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I think that it is very similar in that, as David says, the hype is there. The limo driver, the shoe cleaner, everyone is now talking about crypto. You go into any coffee bar now and listen to the conversations, and you'll hear a conversation about crypto. And similarly, very few people understand the business behind their investment. They would invest their life savings in pets.com, not knowing a clue of how that business was going to make money in 1999. But a similar thing is happening today. So I think the similarities are definitely there. But you know what this enables? What it effectively enables is there's an enormous amount of capital that is being applied to ventures that otherwise would never get funded. And out of that, there is a lot of infrastructure that's going into the ground effectively. Like, is that what happened after the last crash? There was an enormous amount of investment in undersea cables and in broadband technologies and stuff that we're benefiting from today. So I think that investment is going to give a lot of momentum in the future to some of the companies that are around today. But the problem is that because it is completely open and unregulated, there are a lot of ICOs that are happening and a lot of currencies that are being launched that are absolutely rubbish. And I think you all agree with me. And this is going to create a little bit of a bad vibe and a bit of a negative sentiment towards crypto. And there will be a correction as the enforcers have to control this environment as they are. So yeah, I think there will be a correction, and out of that correction, there'll be some very initial and companies that emerge.
Okay, no, great. And do you think that because many of the people in the blockchain space are the same people or are advisors for people in the blockchain space now, do you think that some lessons that were learned back then are going to be applied to ensure that we don't make some of the same mistakes that if they were mistakes, or do you think humans will just behave exactly the same way and well, it looks like they are, but I don't know. I mean,
I'll kick in there before David. Sorry, David.
Go ahead.
Unfortunately, our memories are short, and we have this irrational exuberance we can't help. So, I do think that that there will be, that's not a safety net. Yeah, there's some of us around that have seen the movie before, but the fact is we get super excited by the same things, and I fear some of us are going to make some mistakes.
Okay, yeah.
So first of all, I hope it's not all the same people. New generations should drive the innovation rather than people who've been around for 30 years or more. It is definitely the case. New generations of people are here, and they are very fast in picking up nuances of the technology that otherwise may escape attention, iterating and understanding and digging deep and bringing new ideas. I want to comment not on the honest mistakes, which is absolutely fine. It's part of the game. I want to comment on dishonest scams, because that is what the regulators are very wary of and afraid of. That is when the regulators step in and they say, wait a minute, let's stop everything, because this industry is dominated by fraud, and we cannot allow that. And they would be right. So those in the blockchain space that want to see the healthy development of this industry are responsible for staying away from dubious projects or projects that they believe are outright scams. And the serious projects, on the other hand, have to understand that they cannot win out shouting to be louder than the scammers. It's very easy why. The serious projects have work to do. The scammers have nothing to do but to shout and be loud and spam everybody. So you cannot compete with that. You cannot beat them at their own game, right? And very recently, Facebook, for example, decided that they don't allow any advertising of token sales or Bitcoin or blockchain projects in a total ban. They are kind of preempting any doubt and saying, it doesn't matter, all of you are banned because we cannot judge. So this is interesting, and it could be one of the reasons for decentralized social networks to emerge, so that scammers can advertise there rather than relying on the centralized Facebook.
So if we mean, both of you have spoken sort of about the crash that happened in the early 2000s in terms of dot-coms. I mean, what do you think the experience will be, in now with all the blockchain, based companies? Like you say, there are really legitimate companies. There are some scammers, and I know in the dot-com crash there were some really good companies that went out of business. David, you were sort of victim to that. So is there any idea of how we think it's going to play out?
No. In the sense that the complexity of the world is such that making predictions is really impossible in every practical sense. Now, trends can be established. You know, I do believe that the blockchain technology is here to stay. I do believe that applications such as the Wealthy Coin and Wealth Migrate's blockchain platform are true innovation compared to what was previously available. And there will be many, many more in all areas of the economy. The capacity of measuring and very rapidly creating feedback cycles between enthusiasm and disillusion has generated a lot of little or big crashes for Bitcoin in the past. And we are going through a little big crash today as well in this past month, right? This is actually very healthy because it allows the network to adjust itself, not only to the expectations of people, but also to its own capabilities. We complain that a genetically modified digital cat collection game, CryptoKitties, chokes up the Ethereum network, which is silly, but it won't for long. It won't for long. You know, just as if 20 years ago I would have told you that we will be streaming ultra high definition 4K movies over the internet, which now Netflix does for millions of people, it would have been mind-blowing. We will have mind-blowing performance in the blockchain too.
Okay, no, great, yeah. So the one thing that of course is different right now to the boom bust of the 2000s is that in the 2000s most of those companies were initially were venture funded, where now with the token sale, of course, there is no firm that is putting a board member on your board, for example. How's that going to make things different, and how's that going to change the way things play out? There's two schools of thought in the internet boom bust, where a lot of people believe that potentially the venture capital firms were part of the issue because they were looking for a payday. So is that going to be different now because you don't have that, or what do you think?
We suffer from a huge selection bias when we admiringly fawn to the feet of the giants of the venture capital world, because we don't look at all the firms that didn't make it, and we don't look at all the bad decisions that the winning firms also made. As we speak, I am looking up the investors of Juicero. Juicero was the largest venture capital funded startup failure of last year. And here you go, Kleiner, Perkins, Cofield, and Byers. Sorry for naming them and shaming them, but $118 million of funding for a juice company that went totally bust because they were trying to sell something that nobody wanted and was very, very expensive. Well, they were funded by one of the biggest names in venture capital. So just because venture capital was there in those years in the internet boom, or it is there now, that doesn't mean that it is the wisest group of people who can make no mistakes. They make big mistakes. We make business mistakes as well. The second point that you brought up is that of governance. So how do you make sure that the amount of money that a token sale can raise, that cryptocurrencies carry with them, potentially ending up to be managed and handled by a group of 20-somethings, is not mismanaged, is not misallocated or stolen. And the infrastructure, both legal and governance and smart contracts and whatnot, is not fully there yet. Just a few weeks ago, Vitalik Buterin proposed a new method that he called DICO, Decentralized Application ICO or something like that. I don't remember what it is completely the acronym of, where the DICO would hold the funds that the token sales generate, and then the backers could vote on the roadmap and say, yes, the founders in the project deserve to receive disbursements out of the pool of money that the token sale generated, right? And that is an interesting evolution of the governance issues that are definitely there in the blockchain world.
Yeah, Kev, I think, I'm a little bit more concerned about the lack of control that token holders have over the companies that they've invested in. Certainly, I don't know if we need to go into a conversation about boards, because I think for every board that's contributed a lot to the development of a young startup company, there have been boards that have done nothing or been destructive. So, but I have a similar concern to David that there are a lot of very smart young people building these applications, and they don't necessarily have the experience of running a big and scaling a big business. But I think that they'll find the way themselves. I don't think they necessarily will have to have a controlling shareholder to force them to make decisions. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's most definitely going to be different, but people are gonna, because most of these decentralized companies rely on their communities that have participated in the token sale to really see them flourish. They definitely do require, keeping their community engaged and happy. So it is a bit of a different situation to, I think, what we've seen in sort of more traditional businesses. If we look at the sort of the way that the blockchain space is working, of course we all look at coin market cap and the market caps of these coins and look at that as a value, and a lot of people compare that to company value. Now, I mean, of course, when it comes to a traditional sort of startup, the way that the company is valued is through all sorts of means in terms of the value of the company. But now you have the value of a coin, which is separate to the value of the company. So how's that going to play out now over time?
We are at the very beginning of discovering new types of business models that are themselves decentralized. And the various projects and the way they deploy their applications, and the fact that many of them or most of them are open source and developers can participate globally, and that the mobile phones spread them around in unexpected ways. These create an acceleration of this business model discovery. And part of the understanding that is starting to emerge is that in these new business models, rather than looking at the price list of something, rather than the salespeople that should be receiving bonuses for a quarterly result, etc., everybody's aligned, and everybody's interest is to make sure that the token value is supported or, if possible, increased. And this alignment of interest is creating a lot of beneficial effects. And so concentrating in what I call, rather than calling it a market cap, I call it the network value, concentrating on the network value of a decentralized application as represented by the sum of the liquid tokens unit value is I think, interesting and useful. And it can very, very rapidly incorporate the knowledge that is spreading, you know, a new version of the application being released, an important partnership that adds another few million users to the network, or a use case that is demonstrably valuable to millions of people who adopt the decentralized application as a consequence. This unavoidably is incorporated into the price of a token very, very rapidly, if not even in real time.
Okay, yeah, I see that. It seems like Justin may have fallen off offline there. I'm not too sure why. I know he's in a hotel room, so potentially he's lost internet connection, but we'll just continue, and I'm sure he will be back. So we'll continue with the next question. David, I mean, the internet brought us the ability to speak to the world and sort of has created a global village. What is blockchain going to do to further that?
Well, any economic transaction is speech, is communication, is an agreement, implicit or explicit, transmitting value in both directions, a product or a service that I receive and value for consideration that you receive. And blockchain promises to be able and execute these kinds of modern, economically measurable speech acts of freedom globally, intertwining us and meshing us even more closely in this web, in this network of transactions. And we are really at the very, very beginning of that. But I think it is going to be incredibly empowering and emancipating for a lot of people who have good ideas, creativity, passion, good products, good services. They have not been able to be part of the world that benefited from the internet in the past.
Thanks. Justin, welcome back. The question I just asked there was, in terms of, you know, the internet sort of made the world much smaller, created this global village, and by the way things are looking, sort of blockchain is just bringing that even closer. So, you know, the question really was, you know, what could we see moving forward? I mean, if I look at a lot of the companies that are coming out at the moment, they are multinational in scope, in terms of developers from multiple countries all working remotely. You know, what is this going to do to the world?
I think it's super exciting. You know, if you think about the 90s, if you wanted to develop something, you put a bunch of developers in a room. Thanks to the internet boom of the 90s and the infrastructure that was put in, you know, the undersea cables, for example, that connected India to the rest of the world, suddenly you outsourced everything to India. Indian developers could build stuff remotely, and that's changed the world. Now, I think this next phase that we're going through, and I like to see it as a step, we are now able to leverage crowd to the nth degree. So wherever you're sitting in the world, if you have a business idea that you can sell to the crowd, you will effectively be able to raise money and you'll be able to build it out. And that is super exciting. So yeah, I'd like to come back to the previous question. I think I lost you just before.
Yes.
So I think that it's quite interesting. There's two different types of token. I'm sure that a lot of your viewers actually understand that there's the security token, which is generally linked to something, linked to the equity of the value of the company, or linked to gold or to the US dollar or whatever it is. And those are the ones that obviously the regulators are super concerned about. Then there's the utility token, which is gives you the benefit. I think the best example I heard was if you were to build a new railway company and you gave utility tokens away, you would fund the railway company, and the utility token would give you access to the train, that kind of thing. Yes. But the problem with the security, and I think we're going to face this issue a little bit with the Wealth E, is that if it is really, really an honest coin and it's based on fundamental value in the company, then it's less likely to grow at thousands of % a month. Whereas if you have a utility that you can leverage the crowd and build up an enormous amount of excitement about this thing, it might not necessarily have fundamental value behind it. And so your question was about the value of the companies that are sitting behind these coins. And I think that it's very clear that a lot of these coins are being launched with nothing other than a white paper. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a prospectus. You don't have to have written a line of code. You can have a prospectus of 30 pages, and you can launch and you can raise yourself, as we have seen in the real estate space alone, $15 to $20 million based on that piece of paper. Now, for me, there's no fundamental value in that coin. I think that was my point around the valuation of companies relative to the actual value of the product or service that they or problem that they're trying to solve.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, we're going to move on to the last question now for the evening, which is, sort of moving past the internet boom bust. Canada and Germany recently declared the internet essential for life. Is this going to happen with blockchain? Is blockchain really what's essential? What are your feelings towards that, and your feelings towards the fact that there are countries that are saying we cannot live without the internet? What does this mean for the way we move forward with Internet of Things and all these other technologies?
Modern civilization relies on a lot of things that for the past 10,000 years we have been able to build. And I know if you brought me in the savannah, I would not survive probably 3 days. I'm not either proud or ashamed of that. It is just a fact. So similarly, we are now creating additional services that societies offer to their members that absolutely support the way of life of that society. Just as it has become hard to function if you couldn't read and write in the past 100 years, but actually in Italy, I visited kind of a letter writing station where farmers would come who couldn't read and write, and they would deliver the letters that they wanted to be read to them, and then they would have dictate the letters that they would want to write in response to the people they corresponded with, family members or relatives. Well, similarly, there will still be a lot of people who won't have the internet and won't have blockchain, 10, 20, 30 years from now. Society should support inclusively access to these superior tools of communication and commerce and opportunity. But also, it should respect the dignity of those that, for whatever reason, including their free choice, don't want to participate.
Philosophical. Yeah, you know, I think civilization can only survive if it solves its biggest problems. And we know that although we've solved a lot of problems, we've also grown the size of the world and the population of the world significantly, and still have big problems to solve. And you know, what happens is we tend to, you know, have these breakthrough moments where we innovate and we create some technology that allows us to step up and to solve some of those problems. And I think that this is where we're at right now. I think let's think about the near collapse of the financial system back in 2000 and 2008. What happened is, out of necessity, a bunch of people thought we have to think differently. We have to create a currency that's distributed, that's not owned by any particular country. And suddenly, out of that necessity, evolved this thing called Bitcoin. And out of Bitcoin may not be the thing of the future. You know, I absolutely think that it could be, you know, it could be one of the casualties of the new world, because it is the you know, it is the leader, and sometimes the leader you know, cannot evolve fast enough to stay up with the speed of the innovators. But yeah, so what's happened as a result of that is this blockchain has been discovered and invented, and the amazing momentum that's being created over and above that will ultimately give us the ability to solve some of the bigger problems of the world that we need to solve.
Thank you so much for your insightful thoughts. We're just going to move on now to, can everyone confirm that I am now sharing my screen? We should be seeing the future webinars in the series. So yeah, so just moving on. This webinar series is really exciting, and it's going to continue. So the 15th of February is our next webinar, where we're going to be talking about how blockchain, AI, Internet of Things is going to come together and change the world. Then we have one on the 7th of March, looking at how we're going to have the rise of technology and what we need to do around universal basic income, upskilling, or is there going to be mass unemployment? And on the 14th of March, we're going to be looking at, is blockchain going to change the world? We also have some live events coming up. On the 15th of March, we will, there's an event in Puerto Rico, which David is keynoting at. And then on the 24th, 27th, and 28th of March, David will be in South Africa. So for all of our South African viewers tonight, that's quite an exciting time, and we will be putting out some more information about that as we go forward in the future. So be on the lookout on the Telegram group. That really is the place to find the information. And I wanted to paste it into the chat box, but unfortunately, my GoToWebinar is not allowing me to do that this evening. I don't know why. So you will all be receiving an email after this webinar, which will have the recording of this webinar as well as the link to that Telegram group. So if we just look at exactly where we are, this is something we speak about quite often, just in terms of where Wealth Migrate and Wealthy is actually at the intersection of many technologies. And you know, this is really something that Justin mentioned tonight as well, that there's a number of different things that are happening right now where Wealth Migrate and the Wealthy coin actually sit right at the intersection between gamification, blockchain, social commerce, personalization, the fact that there's a rise in the middle class in many emerging economies, globalization. There's a real social pressure around, you know, democratization to the access of wealth, and investors really want to make a purposeful impact. And the one thing that Wealth Migrate really believe is important is, impacting the planet in a way where we can see the wealth gap being reduced. So just for those of you who are new and haven't seen this before, this is sort of Wealth Migrate in numbers. And, Justin brought up how there are many token sales that are just built on a piece of paper. And, in Wealth Migrate's case, that is not the case. The platform has seen, as you can see there, more than $68 million going through it, with investors coming from 46 different countries around the world. So in terms of a successful ICO, an existing business that's making money is really important, and we've shown that this is the case with Wealth Migrate. Having a team that can execute in any market is really important. And this is just a slide showing the board. There's Justin there, but the board, and there's a management team behind it that are really, really passionate about what they're doing, and global as well in scope. And then the third thing is really having supply and demand to ensure that you have mass consumer adoption. And if we look at the Wealth Migrate platform in terms of numbers of registered users, you can see in 2017 the number really climbed. And this actually is an old graph. I should have put in the new graph that arrived today, but I didn't. For 2018, we're already at just over 2,000 people for the year. This is where the members come from. It's more than half the world. And the transactions through the platform, this is where people are actually investing, you can see is on an upward movement, which really is a good sign. The investors coming from 46 countries, so those are the countries that the investors come from. And Peter Diamandis always says the world's biggest problems, the world's biggest opportunities. And the wealth gap really is a massive problem. At Davos for the World Economic Forum, they always talk about the wealth gap. Unfortunately, it actually is growing. It started to decline, but it is growing once again. And there really is a big opportunity to give people access to something they've never had before. So when it comes to Wealthy and the ecosystem that is being built, this is an ecosystem picture just showing you where the Wealthy coin will fit into the ecosystem, with Wealth Migrate and the potential for many other real estate partners to come on board. And with regards to the token sale, this slide just, if you're on your mobile phone, it is really small, but this picture is in the white paper, which we will be releasing most likely next week. At the moment, we're going through a number of things together with the Wealth Migrate board to make sure that everything is in place that needs to be in place to ensure that we're doing this right. And then in terms of the timing, the crowd sale will begin on the 14th of March. So in terms of the sort of next steps, if you are interested, please do contact us. My email address is there. As well as I spoke about, we do have a Telegram group, which is becoming more active at the moment. And so please do, become part of the community, have your say, and sign up. So at this time, we have had a few questions from people throughout the webinar that we've had this evening. So if you do have any further questions, you can type those into the question box now. We're going to go into this time of questions and answers with David and Justin. And so if you do have any questions, as I say, please type those in, and I'll be going through those questions now. So if we look at the first question that was asked, if we're in pre-browser phase, this question actually said, David, if we're in pre-browser phase, what is the graphical interface of blockchain going to look like?
Nothing. It will look probably nothing, because we are already moving into conversational interfaces, and I see no reason to re-implement on an old generation of interfaces the functionality of new interactions. So yes, today we install decentralized applications as mobile apps, wallets and exchanges and other things. But moving ahead, I believe that many more people will be reachable through a dialogue system that we will need to completely still design.
Okay, no, great. Just so everyone knows, I am going to be putting up some polls whilst we're answering these questions. We really ask these polls so that we can get feedback from the community and understand where everyone is. So whilst you're sitting there, please do sort of click the answer on the polls there. The next question says, what is the point of blockchain? From Lorette. She says, is it to decentralize every centralized thing, banks, governments? What is the point and how far is it going to go?
Laying down a train track is probably not going to be decided in a decentralized manner in the future either, right? So there will be things that are centralized just as they are today. The point of blockchain is that it is an invention, a very recent invention, a mathematical invention that solved an unsolved problem. Before blockchain, we didn't know whether it was possible to establish a shared truth without somebody that we needed to trust centrally. Now we know it is possible to establish a shared truth without trusting a central authority. And the consequences of this mathematical invention are being explored in the blockchain.
Okay, yeah. So are we, how far is it going to go, and how quickly do you think we're going to see governments looking to actually use this technology and sort of from a decentralized, centralized point of view?
No, absolutely. So we have to distinguish 3-4 different things here in this question. Nation states are the supreme centralized organization today on the planet. You know, they are extremely powerful, extremely dangerous. Nobody killed more people ever than nation states, right? Luckily, we have fewer and fewer wars. Nation states are becoming tamer and tamer. So we have a chance of reforming them using blockchain technologies without the nation states becoming too panicky and you know, creating violence as a consequence, hopefully. But the other part is, is Bitcoin going to be used by nation states? Not necessarily. One of the reasons why fiat money, dollars or euro or yen, exist is because you are legally required to pay your taxes with them. So this use of fiat money is going to survive for a long time. And the third implicit question in the one that you asked me is whether blockchain-based governance is going to reform how we vote, how we decide policies, what the policy making and the regulatory environment is going to be in a society that is going to be more and more potentially decentralized even if still existing under the umbrella of a nation state. And I believe that there will be, and there are actually already experiments of blockchain technologies enabling electronic voting, more flexible and more better adapted types of democracy, rather than the dictatorship of the majority that today we exercise.
Okay, yeah. The Manu's question sort of follows that up. He asked, how do you see governments regulating blockchain applications?
Well, they can't really. China and so very simply, you know, the first blockchain application is Bitcoin, and still the most successful one. So we can look at what is going on with Bitcoin and then project out, forecast out from there. And China and Russia were very aggressive and arrogant and proud in their declarations little more than a year and a half ago, when both were saying we are already preparing legislation to make Bitcoin illegal, right? And then they realized they couldn't do it. When the Arab Spring happened in Egypt, the government shut the internet off for 48 hours to stop the rebels from coordinating on Facebook and Twitter. And then they turned it back on because it was like choking the nation itself that could not survive without the internet. The revolution was less of a problem than not having the internet, right? So soon it is going to be like that with blockchain and Bitcoin. Even if technically it were possible, and it is not, stopping blockchain and Bitcoin will choke the economic breath of a society. And so it is something that nobody will want to do. And no, so nations, the states will try to regulate things, of course, that's what bureaucracies do, so they will do it, but the most successful ones are going to be those that keep this regulation at the minimum possible.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd add to that, Kevin. You know, remember that ultimately governments are appointed by the crowd. And so they can't really afford to kill off innovation. And I actually believe that a bit of regulation will encourage broad adoption. I think it's actually, you know, it'll be good to have some limited regulation just to give it credibility, to take the rogues out of the industry, and I think that's what will help it to accelerate faster than if it has to find its own way.
No, absolutely. So Lorette asks, do you think that we're just going to have a few big players in the space like the internet has a few big players in 20, 30 years time when there's, you know, blockchain players, there's just going to be big players? Or because of its decentralized sort of nature, is it going to be, you know, is that not going to be the case? Or is it something we don't even know?
Well, yes, obviously we don't know, but that doesn't stop us pretending that we do, right? So there will be very, very, very big networks, right? Today, one of the biggest centralized networks is Facebook. Let's say 2 billion people, probably a little bit less, but let's say 2 billion. So there will be networks based on blockchain that are larger than Facebook. Will they represent the kind of centralized governance and shareholder structure and the kind of wealth concentration that Facebook represented? I don't believe so. And the participation in those networks will be as if it were widely distributed share ownership. You know, it is not that. It's just an analogy where everybody will be incentivized to behave and to vote and to decide and to participate for the benefit of those networks. And we will participate in many of those networks, hundreds or potentially thousands of those networks.
Yeah. Linda just asks, says, David, can you repeat the the predicted value of the peak? That's like looking into a crystal ball.
Yeah. Well, it's easy because I didn't say when, right? So what I said is the network value of blockchain assets is going to exceed what the total market capitalization of .com companies was before the crash. So that was $1 trillion, right? So I am saying that the total network value of the crypto assets is going to exceed $3 trillion. And let me go out on a limb. I believe that is going to happen within the next 5 years.
Justin, we won't ask you because you're too conservative. So Amanda just says, what's the next best thing past Bitcoin? Is there technologies moving so fast at the moment? Is there going to be a new blockchain? You know, is there something after blockchain that's even better? Again, crystal ball stuff.
No, absolutely. It is already happening, right? Bitcoin itself is evolving as code. Some people are saying, hey, I do better. I can know better. I know how to resolve the problems of Bitcoin, of scaling, transaction fees, choking of the network. They created Bitcoin Cash. So if you believe they are right, you should use Bitcoin Cash. You should maybe buy or hold Bitcoin Cash. You should transact in Bitcoin Cash. And that is kind of voting with your feet and with your money. The same with Ethereum. Ethereum has a much richer programming language that enables more sophisticated programs. And on top of the Ethereum blockchain live a lot of the tokens that in the ICOs, the token sales projects are minting and then selling or distributing in various ways. And then there are alternative blockchains on top of the Bitcoin and Ethereum blockchain, like Neo in China, that appears to be, receiving kind of a stamp of approval from the Chinese government to then be the basis of Chinese blockchain projects. And there will be many more. And the speed with which they are evolving is extremely fast. Because contrary to Microsoft, if you found a bug in Microsoft Word and you told them or they realized there was a bug and then you needed to wait years before the new version came out, what is happening today is that in an open source project, there are thousands of developers working and trying to make it better. And that is actually a good measure of the success of a blockchain project, to look, and there are ways to monitor how frequently it is updated, how many people are contributing to it, and it really creates an incredibly fast evolution.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's so true. Anne says, will there be a dark blockchain like the dark web, or does decentralization means that's impossible?
There already is. And the reason the dark web is dark is because it is absolutely appropriate and necessary to preserve privacy in your transactions. I encourage all of our listeners not to buy drugs or do anything illegal, but to be proud of every step they take to make sure that their private thoughts and private communications stay private. The false dichotomy of secrecy that we need to renounce in order to keep us safe is extremely dangerous. It makes us all less safe. A society that wants to adapt to the changing attitudes and behaviors of its component members must be able to move from a minority position to a majority position. And it is happening all the time, whether it is same-sex marriage or recreational marijuana, or whatever it is going to be the future shift. These are changes in the society in the United States, for example, that under a totalitarian gaze of an watching government that excludes privacy cannot happen. So welcome the dark web and welcome the dark blockchain. Monero is a relatively recent coin that, contrary to Bitcoin, which is pseudonymous, Monero is anonymous. So the cost of unraveling who is behind the transaction and how much was transacted and who was it sent to is enormous. It is, for every practical matter, impossible to find a Monero transaction and unravel it. And, you know, a lot of people are afraid of that, but I think it is an important component of our society.
Okay. Right now, this is the last question that we've got currently. So if there are any further questions that anyone has to ask, now's the time to ask them. Otherwise, this is the last one and it's time to go. It's from Donovan. He says, do you think China will be able to block cryptos, is his question. And I'll add to that, do you think China want to block cryptos? Or is it just that they want to make sure that they know what's going on?
So there are different issues around China. One is that it is, you know, the preeminent centralized planned economy and successful at that. You know, 50 years ago, there are tens of millions of people who were starving in China, and now they are not. The creation of the Chinese middle class is one of the biggest success stories of the 20th century. So we should be extremely proud of that. But they are ready to give up individual freedom in order to assure the functioning of the society as they believe it should. And that includes capital controls. And Bitcoin represents a payment rail, a transaction rail that they cannot control, and they don't like that. So what they are doing is to control the interfaces. Once you are in the blockchain world, in the Bitcoin world, you are beyond their control. But as you want to move into it, you know, buying Bitcoin with your yen, for example, that's where they can exercise control, and that is what they are doing. They basically are making crypto exchanges illegal, and then they will try and re-establish them under some kind of licensed model and under extremely tight control. And it is not still very clear how that is going to happen. But the interfaces between the old and the new world, that is where this can happen.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. So it seems like we don't have any further questions at the moment, and it's pretty much time for the webinar to come to a close anyway. So just some closing thoughts from either of you with regards to what we've spoken about tonight. You know, Wealth Migrate and the Wealthy Coin. Justin, we'll start with you.
Well, you know, obviously the white paper hasn't been released yet, but there's been quite a lot of work put into it, and I think we're all pretty excited to see what it entails. But you know, I think that we're in a unique situation. We know that blue chip real estate is a fantastic security. It's not volatile like stock markets, and the better quality the asset, the less accessible it is to people outside of that particular circle. And when I say circle, it might be the few high net worth individuals in New York that are associated with that particular group or building. Open that circle up wider and wider, and it becomes much more accessible for people to make that investment in that blue chip asset. And one of the problems that we need to solve is the moving of the currency. You cannot invest a small amount of money with the fiat currencies if you are sitting in a country like India, or for that matter, South Africa. It is very complicated. So, you know, it makes it unviable to invest $50 a month. And that's the problem that we're trying to solve. And hopefully we can solve that problem. And this is a technology that wasn't available for us to do so, you know, 5 years ago.
Great. Thanks, Justin. Thanks so much. And David?
Well, I am definitely looking forward to the next steps in the Wealth Migrate blockchain journey and token journey. I believe that the team and the business model are absolutely ready to bring the benefit of your platform to an even wider audience. And this is what it is about, an inclusive platform of participation, creating a network that can teach, that can emancipate as many people as possible. And so that is why these webinars are so good, as well as your effort in cutting them up and posting them on YouTube. It's really part of what we do and what Wealth Migrate does in sharing knowledge and empowering everybody.
Absolutely. I mean, that really is our goal. And so thank you to the two of you. It's really been a pleasure to talk to you this evening for me. And to everyone who's online, thank you so much for joining. As I said, we will be you'll be getting some more information around the recordings of this. And yeah, it's very exciting times. Please, once this is online, share it with people, build the community, and you know, we're really headed for exciting times ahead. So thank you very much to the two of you, and good night, everybody, or good morning if you're in New Zealand.
Okay.
Bye-bye.